wonder what's hot in the baking world right now? It's not even that complicated. You get store-bought croissants, cut them open, shove in some store-bought cookie dough, and that's it. Hi everyone, I'm Gemma Stafford, professional chef, cookbook author, and creator of Bigger Bolder Baking. Welcome to Need to Know, your go-to podcast for everything baking entertainment. From the latest trends,
this is the viral scrambled pancake trend.
What? To the tips and tricks you crave.
We discovered that if you take apple peels, toss them in a little cinnamon and sugar, and bake them for about an hour in the oven, you get a really lovely treat.
Plus exclusive interviews with baking pros.
Hey, it's Liz from the Sugar Geek Show. Thanks for having me, Gemma.
We've even got the Bold Baking Hotline to answer all of your baking queries and questions.
Is a Dutch oven really necessary for baking bread, and what difference does it make?
Yes, I think we probably would agree on that, do we, Oni?
Yeah,
oh, good. So join us every Sunday for your new weekly baking ritual. It's everything you need to know.
Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Dean Fuerth. We'll talk to Dean about sushi, wine, sake, and more. We'll taste some sake and wine that Dean handpicked for our weekly wine sip. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio. We bring wine to the people. Born in New York City to a family of lawyers, Dean Fuerth is a proud Hunter College dropout. He left school to become a production assistant on 30 Rock and Law & Order. To make additional money, Dean worked at some of New York's better-known restaurants, settling in as a front server at legendary New York City restaurant Boulé, eventually becoming a somm. After time at Bar Balut and Bettany, he joined Sushi Nakazawa in 2017 as the beverage director, now overseeing New York City, D.C., and at some point, we'll get into it, L.A. I don't know where that's at. All right. Welcome to the Grape Nation, Dean.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, we're talking to Dean. We're downtown at Sushi Nakazawa in the West Village. All right, Dean, just let's frame things a little, and then we'll get into a lot of other things. Did you drop out of college? Tell me why. Then tell me about that transition into a PA, and then why do you leave that and sort of go into hospitality and wine? Give me that part of your life.
Absolutely. I sure did drop out of college
after
about a semester and a half. I definitely wasn't either focused or confident classroom student at that point in my life, and was interested in studying films. That's what I signed up for. But
were you studying that for like 6 weeks at Hunter?
6 months, we'll call it.
Okay.
But did lead into just through networking and connections in the city. I had getting my foot in the door in a couple of lower end positions on some high end productions, which proved to be really enjoyable but very inconsistent work. So that, at least through financial motivation, at first led me to restaurants. That first position was as a busser and some points a bar back and dishwasher some nights at Bella Blue Ristorante on 70th in Lexington.
Isn't that still around?
Still is.
Yeah, I've walked by it.
And intend on going back for a visit at some point for nostalgia's sake. And then from there, I realized I could make a little more money if I became a food runner. So that led me to Quality Meats in Midtown for a year, just bumping big
That had
plates.
to be a busy place, right?
Yeah, like 400 covers minimum per night with big, heavy trays full of sirloins and 3 flights of stairs. Definitely adds up after a couple runs.
You mean schlepping steaks?
Definitely schlepping steaks.
Okay.
And then from there on to Park Avenue Bistro, right at the tail end.
So at this point, are you just doing hospitality,
I'm
or
just
you
trying to work up the
juggling?
ladder.
But you're not doing PA crap or anything?
I still was on and off,
You
but
are,
it would be every
okay.
couple of weeks and nothing that would be sufficient to pay the bills. So from there, Went to Park Avenue Bistro. That was my first server position. Definitely a restaurant that was in its death throes a little bit, very slow, and not a lot of consistent shifts there. And then, got my first little bit of waiter experience, and I did happen to be a guest at Bar Balut on the Upper West Side with my grandmother. That's where we would frequently go to grab lunch.
Were you living in that area?
So I grew up on the Upper West Side, and my whole family's
further north.
Exactly, but
yeah.
We've all been around Lincoln Center for about 4 generations now. So as she was getting older and it was a little harder to be mobile, Bar Balut was across the street from her building. So just through ease of commute, that was kind of our spot. And we were getting brunch one day, and randomly just like asked the manager, who was like deep in the weeds, if they had any openings. And he told me, I'm a little busy now, but come back tomorrow and we'll interview. I came back the next day. He did no recollection of who I was, and, but managed to be persistent and score an interview. Somehow kind of bullshitted my way in, and next thing I knew, I was working for Daniel Balut. And
was Balut sued there too?
That was before Balut sued. So it was all Bar Balut.
Just Bar Balut.
That used to be,
which got great notices, upon opening.
Yeah, it sure did. Michael Madrigal, who
was Michael the guy that you spoke to the night before and the next day, or was someone else?
No, he wouldn't have given me the time of day. He was just the floor manager.
Well, but he's one of the sweetest guys in the world.
Sure
so
is.
Don't sell him down. So he's
still a very dear friend of mine, and definitely my mentor at the start.
So you take the gig there.
Take the gig there, and then I find myself working in an environment where they still do the big bottle pours, but
I remember that.
Yeah, we had a program called Panier, where every night we'd be opening some Magnum or Jeroboam.
Michael was one of the early social media guys where he would post that. You got to give him that credit,
definitely.
Right? Because we take it for granted now, but he was all over that.
No, he had a huge following on his Twitter feed, and he would put the pour of the night out 30 minutes before service opened, and the bottle would be gone an hour later. So via that and just what the program was in general, I got a crash course on champagne and Burgundy and Rhone and cold California wines and out of large formats, and just got to experience that in such high volume every single night of the week. And remember my first one that I sold was 2009 Christian Moreau Les Clos out of Magnum. Which I thought I did a great job by selling it, and then he comes up behind me and he's like, "Asshole, you just poured 7 ounces in the glass," and
too much.
So I learned how to calibrate a little bit there, but really kind of.
How would you know?
You find out one way or the other, and it's generally how I find out my lessons in life. But really just fell in love with French wine. Got to experience some of the.
Does Michael embrace a relationship with you, where he kind of takes you under his wing, talks to you about wines, or he's too busy? Or
a little bit. He didn't give me I'd say it was a backhanded nod of encouragement at first. I think it was more amusing to him just because I did a good job of pissing off the managers, and we had pretty similar sophomoric senses of humor. So
is that still your personality, where you piss people off, or you calm your ass down? Okay.
I like to think I've calmed down a little bit in life.
Because you're not a famous guy, but there's a famous story about winning, a contest there and getting a free meal, and you had the balls to eat it like in the dining room.
15 years later, I've not lived it down, but I guess we'll get to that later.
But that's legend,
Right.
All right, so
or infamy.
You leave Balut at some point,
right? So despite the fact that we did develop a friendship, and he was very encouraging as a mentor, I suppose via my A, an experience at first, and then B, several maybe disciplinary infractions, you would call them, kind of created a ceiling to getting bumped up to the actual floor som position. So
you had to leave.
Yeah, left no stone unturned and trying to make that happen, but didn't seem like it was going to. So one of my friends that I worked with at Bar Balut had ended up at Boulay as a captain and maitre d', and knew that I was looking for a move, said, come in and interview and see what the story is. They took a look at my resume and were just like, you can be a front server if you want.
So you went in as a front server.
Bumped my expectations down, but I was like, I'm cool with putting my head down and working for it. Ended up getting canned after 6 months. Because I walked in from what, was a really strong, incredible wine program, but definitely in a more casual bistro setting, despite it being, Dinex programming and Daniel Balut service, it was a little more casual, and Boulay was just in its micro details. And
did they see you as not adopting, or?
I had struggled with the learning curve at first.
That pissed you off? Like, hey, wait, I could do this. or you just kind of walked out?
It definitely was,
because that's not the end of the story with Belay.
No, not at all. But my first ever shift there was a wedding buyout, and my job was simply to stand there with a tray of champagne flutes and not move. And I somehow managed to lose my balance and ditch the whole tray in the entranceway about 3 minutes before the wedding walked in. So started off at Boulay a little bit behind the 8 ball. And
you were marked.
Yeah, so more accurate way of putting it. But yeah,
was that really the case? Like everyone looked at you like you're the guy. Hey, there's the guy who dropped the tray.
One of the senior captains at the time, because I panicked and froze, and everybody just swooped in and cleaned up the mess for me, and I felt even more useless because of that. And one of the captains just grabs me by the arm and pulls me aside and tells me to go outside and figure out if you want to do this or not. And I went out against the side of brushstroke and just cried against the wall for about 10 minutes because I felt so shitty. But
you hung in there.
It still didn't work out the right time. I definitely had was on radar with the service director there, and he did not make life easy for me at first. So
you leave?
Any excuse? No, I got canned in a really silly situation, but went on to Commerce Restaurant, which ironically is about 100 feet down the block from
Commerce Street, right.
So spent quite some time on the street.
That's not around still, right?
Commerce? It's in its 3rd iteration since I worked there. I mean, it had
Commerce Inn, is it? No,
it's Commerce Inn. It was Commerce
Isn't
under
that
Harold Moore.
Jody and Rita?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they own it now.
Isn't that like some Quaker or something? Weird concept?
Yep. You can get all the rare bit you want over there.
There you go, rare bit.
And it was 50 Commerce in between the two of those very briefly. So I go to Commerce for a year. Cut my teeth on actually helping to run a program. I get to play around with pairings. That's a good
experience.
So that was my real training
clicks
wheels.
A little more.
For sure.
Why do you leave there?
So then the beverage director of Boulay comes in with his wife, and his wife I worked with at Bar Balloud, so we had a pretty good friendship. But comes into Commerce for dinner, and
not the guy who fired you.
Not the guy who fired me.
Okay.
But I asked the chef, because it was an a la carte style restaurant. It was like, can we do some diminishing returns, fine dining portions, and kind of do a tasting menu for him. And I got the green light, did a wine pairing with it. And I guess it, was a re-interview for him to show that I'd kind of got my shit together and learned a thing or two. So a year to the day of me starting at Commerce, he calls me and asks if I want to come back to Boulay as a sommelier, and jumped at that and took it.
Just for chronology, what year was that?
That was, so I was at Bar Balloud 2010 to 12. I was at Boulay as a front 12 to 13. Took Commerce early 13, and then started back at Boulay in 14.
And you leave Boulay when?
November 2015 to take Bettany.
For kind of step up for a better job.
Big step up, yep.
I'm intrigued by Bettany because great space, great notices, great everything, good chef, and then it just closes down. I still don't know who was the chef?
Bryce Schumann.
Right. Didn't he open up something downtown or something?
He had a spot called Sweetbriar. I think he was very briefly at Ilias when they opened, and then I was actually in London this past weekend, and I went to the Nomad Hotel for dinner, and turns out he's the chef, which was kind of a strange surprise in London.
Wow!
Of all the places I went for dinner, ran into him again.
So how long was Bettany? Were you there the duration or a part?
I was there for the last 13 months that it was open. So
okay.
It was part of the.
So that closes down on you.
Closes down.
So do we go to Nakazawa, or there's something in between?
No, we took about 8 months off to figure out what we wanted next.
Do you do anything? You travel or find
I did. I was
ayahuasca. I mean, you do anything?
all the above.
Okay.
I was at the time I was dating a woman who lived in Montreal, so I kind of pulled the plug on New York for a couple weeks.
That's a cool town, Montreal.
Yeah, I love it.
Good wine town.
Very cool. Great restaurant scene. But just
so we're going to end this with tell me how the Nakazawa thing comes about.
Right. So I've a couple months of soul searching. I'd was flattered that a lot of opportunities had arisen based on just the short term I was at Bettany, that I think before taking that job, I would have jumped at in a heartbeat. But after, what my experience in French restaurants was before that, and just how, really devastating it was the way that restaurant closed and how suddenly, I knew I didn't want to do French fine dining again, and, wanted something that made me feel excited and challenged and would be different. And I think I interviewed 20 to 25 different places over 6 months. Nothing felt right. Raj, who was still running Daniel Blue's restaurants at the time, needed some help filling holes around the company. Yes. another buddy of mine. So I was at Barbalud and Sud filling in for a bit. I ran DB Bistro's program for like 2 months, went to DBGB when it was still open. So it's just kind of like mercenarying around the restaurant group. And then that dried up. Had a 3-week mercenary stint at La Compagnie des Vins Naturels down in Soho. With Caleb. Which was kind of like the Bettany refugees camp for a little bit. Yeah, a lot of people cycled in and out of there, just filling in work. And then I was with my buddy, didn't have a thing going on, was sitting outside, and I ended up getting a random phone call from one of our owners, Alessandro Borgignon, who I'd known from working at Commerce and taking care of at a few different restaurants since being in the West Village, and asked me what I'm doing, and was like, not too much these days. And it's basically like, we need a new beverage director for Nakazawa. Are you interested in talking? So I'm always happy to chat, and came down for an interview. Quickly? Happened pretty quickly.
How long was Nakazawa open at that point?
I came on August 1st, 2017, and it opened in somewhere around August in 2013.
Okay, so they've been up and running.
Right.
When did Nakazawa get that 4-star review? How far into?
So just a couple months, about 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think about the job, or you want to take it?
I knew the people, so that was already like a plus. I just felt the familiarity.
The money was good.
Heard it was a great paying job.
Okay.
The idea of working with sake was interesting, in that I really didn't have a lot of experience with it beforehand. So
and they were okay with that.
I was very upfront with that.
So there was some kind of connection.
I mean, to this day, when I'm hiring, the good thing you can assume is that really no one knows anything about sake when they're first starting out with it. So,
and we're going to talk about that a little.
Sure.
All right. So that's how you got here.
Correct.
Still here, and we're going to go forward. I'm just intrigued about one thing. I mean, how does like a Jewish lawyer family let their friggin' kid drop out of college and go into hospitality? I mean, like the Syrian Jews, they go into their dad's clothing business. You go into like some restaurant.
Yeah, I kind of pulled a 180. I wouldn't say it was encouraged at first. And I will say I'm proud of how I brought my family around, because they were kind of challenging diners in certain regards.
Were they savvy a little, or New Yorkers?
I was very lucky to grow up going out to eat and being exposed to restaurants and really great restaurants. So I guess there was
you took advantage of being in New York. Your parents were somewhat open to.
For sure. So definitely an innate comfort level there. But yeah.
All right. One last question, and then I have a bunch of general questions. Along the way, there were some mentors that certainly you could cite. I mean, Michael Madrigal definitely was one, even when you were there. I mean, I know now he's a friend. And
for sure.
Anyone else?
Madrigal definitely, nurtured me catching the wine bug. But I'd say Adrian Falcone at Boulet, who I worked under afterwards, really taught me how to.
Is Adrian in the business still? Or?
He's got his own project in the works. He was at Essential like Christoph. For a little bit, but he's got his own thing coming soon, which I'm very excited to see when it finally comes to fruition.
Who took some time to
everything does
talk to
but yeah, he just showed me how to like actually work like a pro and be organized, and
that level of fine dining and all that.
Grow up and elevate myself a little bit with some healthy ass kickings along the way.
All right, so there you go. All right, so for this podcast, I don't want to focus on just sake. I don't want to focus on just wine. I don't want to focus on just sushi. The intriguing thing to me here is how good the sushi is, how legit the wine program is, and, how you've really upped the sake game. So we're going to talk about all of that. But I have a few questions and curiosities. So you've been doing this 7 years. You've been doing it longer. Let me ask you a few general questions. The proliferation of sushi and omakase restaurants in New York, like in the last decade, has been crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And probably in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, what, and along with that, I guess Korean has been a hot category.
Absolutely.
But when you say sushi and omakase, why did that happen? What is it? It was its time. New York sophisticated.
I mean, at the risk of sounding arrogant on behalf of our restaurant group,
I think, do already. But go ahead.
I do think that we did have something to do with it for sure. I think between
So you look at Nakazawa looks at itself as an early entry and an influencer.
Absolutely.
I buy that.
I think that,
I mean, you're not talking about an average place. You're talking about a place that hit the ground running and hit it hard.
I like to think we did a good job.
So that's one. Give me another, idea, reason or two.
Of why omakase?
Why sushi just blew up and still stays that way.
I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, I think besides us, there were a couple of early people in the game like Onodera and 15 East and obviously like Masa. But with that, it's inspired future generations of, people who have worked there to go on and open their own places. Like I can count a couple of our chef de cuisines that have gone on to kind of branch out and expand.
I also guess it's, newer cuisine, unique. I mean, to this day, you still meet people that haven't had sushi. Say it.
It's been around a long time, but not at that type of quality.
Right. I mean, Hatsuhana's been there a million years. Right.
You can get Japanese food in the Bronx.
Right.
It's true.
Right. So it's nice to hear that, you guys had a part in it, and you certainly feel the way you do. The other curiosity I had is, and you kind of alluded to it, is what's it like going from like traditional dining, which you kind of went through every iteration, to service at a sushi restaurant? I mean, is that like a retrain?
In a lot of ways, there's definitely a specificity to service in our restaurants. And, I'd say like just our front of house service is very much French Michelin fine dining inspired. So
that vibe was brought in.
Correct.
But what about what's built in? Multi courses?
Right. I mean, I had a definitely remedial understanding of fish just from working in good restaurants. But, when you have to learn all the Japanese names, or there's a different Japanese name for every part of that fish's growth cycle, just it's learning so much new Japanese hyper detailed information at first. Plus having to know sake.
You're inquisitive and you're kind of a student. You embed yourself in all this stuff. And I mean, you're looking at like tuna belly charts and all of that, right? Just figuring everything out. Easy transition, or it took time?
Very, very harsh, steep learning curve at first.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, again, what I alluded to with just learning the food and the specificities of service. I came in and I had played around with a few sakes at Bethany as pairings, but I'd never worked with a comprehensive list before. And
that was more you than the need to have sake.
Right.
Here let's talk about that a little.
Sure.
I think a lot of people, a lot of my listeners, some of them are sophisticated, some of them drink good stuff, but don't give a crap about the backstory. Let's talk about sake for a second. Sake comes from what they call breweries, right? Wines come from vineyards and wineries.
Absolutely.
Simplistically, remember the word simplistically. Tell me the difference in the process, or really how sake is made, because I know you studied the shit out of this. Rice polishing, perfection. There's a whole thing, right?
Absolutely. So wine, which is made from grapes, which is has natural sugar to it. So you can basically crush your grapes, add yeast to it. It'll start creating CO2 and alcohol. So you have a basic fermentation there. Rice is all starch. So there's no consumable sugar at first. So if you were to sprinkle yeast, let it sit for 100 years, nothing would happen.
So starch is not sugar, or starch?
No, so starch are long chain molecules, whereas simple sugars are short chain molecules, which can be consumed by yeast. So you have to convert one to the other. So you take your rice, you steam it, and then you inoculate it with a mold called koji, or Aspergillus oryzae.
Go backwards for a second.
Sure.
You missed an important part, which maybe we'll get to.
Polishing.
Yeah, which has, that's like a big deal.
Well, I was going to start with the difference between sake rice and what you would eat in a restaurant or at home.
Yeah.
So whereas sake rice has a completely opaque starch and then a translucent outer bran. The outer bran is composed of proteins and lipids, amino acids, things that, depending on the fermentation you're trying to pull off, can either impede it or add off flavors. And if you're thinking about these, hyper polished competition grade Junmai Daiginjos, which are, really pretty and fruity and floral, that's because you're really only utilizing the inner pure starch to ferment it. So the idea is the more of that outer bran you're polishing off, the more refined the product will be, at least on paper.
And they go by percentages, right?
Correct.
20% polish.
So 70% would be a Junmai, 60% Junmai Ginjo, and then 50% or below.
So what
Junmai
direction
Daiginjo.
are you moving to better product? Lower percentage, or
is
that the right question?
Two different schools of thought. I mean, there was, just because of how technology was advancing in the sake world, people were like, oh, how low can we polish? How, micro refined can we make it? But now there's, I think maybe kind of hand in hand with the natural wine movement, there's definitely
I want to talk to you about
an
that.
echelon of brewers that are polishing only 10% off, and they're trying to keep more of that savory, rustic character. So it really depends. But anyway.
So the way you don't eat wine grapes, you don't eat sushi, you don't eat sushi, right?
It doesn't cook evenly. So like table rice, all those things I just mentioned, those are all scattered throughout the grain.
Right. Is there terroir in sake?
This is absolutely.
Like, can you peg different prefectures or climate, soils?
It's a complicated question because, there are certain regions that I think have a very defined style. And then, like Tochigi Prefecture, for instance, they have a Tochi Guild, a group of all their different brewers from around the region. And their rule is everybody has to do something different. So like...
but isn't it all the same water, soil, climate?
Definitely not.
It's not in that one area.
Yeah, northern Japan is mostly basalt and volcanic formation, and that's why you see so much soft water and kind of softer sake in general. Whereas down south you get more limestone and granites. So it really depends. And then depending on like the water source itself, there can be either an absence of mineral content, which will translate to a kind of rounder, softer, more elegant drinking experience, or something that has...
So it's not what's best, it's what you like.
Yeah, there's, within that country...
if you like a rounder, then you look for a sake producer where the water, is not that mineral.
I think for, finding some benchmark comparison in the world of wine, you can really find anything in that single country in one beverage category.
So you would probably be the best guy to ask this. Do wine and sake share similar characteristics, or we're talking like that's that, this is this?
When I first started, I was definitely looking for points of comparison just because of how lost I was in trying to...
Out of necessity,
is
for sure. Still important now?
I think definitely when, greeting guests, and we do get a lot of, beginner sake drinkers here, and often I'm like, what kind of sake do you think you're looking for? And, we might just get dry as a response.
But that's some crap anyway. What do you like? Red, white?
Right.
So, what do you want to spend? What type of body do you like?
Exactly. So, an easy tool for us is like, what kind of wine do you like to drink typically? If it's, Sauvignon Blanc, I might recommend a more kind of citrus driven, lean Junmai sake. If you like, really oaky, rich Chardonnay, probably lean into Junmai Daiginjo territory.
There's enough options to back people into that, right? Just like wine.
Many options.
Are we still at the point where, people are coming into your place, they're dropping more than their local sake place. They have an idea that there's good offering of wine and all. Do you still have to stand over people and demystify sake to them? Like
every night.
There are still people that are like, what is this?
Absolutely.
And you walk them through that whole check down that we just talked about.
2-hour journey through Japan.
Last thing on this. I know you have WSET certifications. I don't know if you're done or not. Are there sake certifications, and have you participated in them?
There are. So 2 years ago, I took it's called the Sake Scholar Course. It's with a master sommelier named Michael Tremblay, a Canadian gentleman who's really kind of inserted himself to being the forefront of sake education in the Western Hemisphere, as far as I'm concerned. So it's like a 3-day intensive course that went through all 47 prefectures, and he really does focus on the idea of terroir with water sources.
So there's 47 prefectures.
47 prefectures.
Is it like a state with all the counties? Are they generally in one area, or they're all over the place?
Also, Hokkaido's up north. That's both its own island and prefecture.
Okay, so there is a spread out.
Honshu is where you have the vast majority. There's Shikoku, the smaller island, which has 4, and then there's Kyushu in the south, which is kind of between those two.
Right. So it is. So on the certification thing, you did that. Are there other opportunities out there?
So there's that. Took the test, passed it, and then I did my WSET, started my diploma for wine, but I'm about to take my advanced for sake at some point in the next couple months.
With the same organization?
With the WSET. Correct.
So I kind of figured this out, that certification nowadays is for your own edification. Because as far as professionally, who gives a crap about? I mean, half my friends in the business turn their pin back, the Master Psalm thing, right? Nobody cares. I mean, do you need that for a job to get 10,000 more? Is that still the vibe in the business?
I did get strong-armed into getting my court certification to keep the Bettany job. I had to have that within 3 months of starting.
But those were the days.
They were.
I'm talking about now.
Now I feel like I think it's died off, and how, I think what the importance of it is, I think, to really build a New York ready sake or wine professional. I personally felt like I had mentors that were excellent teachers, and the restaurant was a classroom in itself. So, I
mean, one of the greatest guys I know in wine to this day is Raj Par. The guy never took one. I mean, the guy just has a palate and a mind and caring. Michael is, there's that handful of guys.
Right.
All right, we're talking to Dean Fuerth. Dean is the beverage director at Sushi Nakazawa in New York City and DC. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Nakazawa and what these guys do here. You're listening to The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westhome.com.
All right, we're back. We're back with my guest, Dean Fuerth. Dean is the beverage director at Sushi Nakazawa. Let's talk about Sushi Nakazawa. How long has Nakazawa, New York, been around?
Going on just over 11 years now.
Pretty good run.
Say so.
Going strong. And then Nakazawa opened in DC when, which you're involved with?
In 2018, in June.
18, so that's mature now.
Sure is.
That's a good market, I would assume. International, moneyed, educated. And then I hear rumblings. I know you've done pop-ups, Aspen, I think Florida. I hear rumblings about Los Angeles.
Yes.
What's the status of that?
So it's a project that we have had in mind since before the pandemic. So it's
all right. So it was a pre-pandemic checklist thing,
right? And then we had to zigzag around that period of time to kind of come back around to it.
Did you have a site then?
We did. Yeah, it's the same space.
Same space, what, as now, or as you're going to move?
The same location we had in mind, and that we were in talks for.
So is Nakazawa LA going to open?
It sure will at some point.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. All right,
construction stuff, but we're getting there.
I'll leave it at that. We talked about this offline a little, but one of the great promoters of interest in sushi was the movie Jiro Dreams of Sushi. And I got to chat with Mr. Bourguignon a little. And I want you to tell me the connection between that movie, which really kind of juiced a lot of people about sushi,
sure,
and Nakazawa, because it's a nice story.
Absolutely. So David Gelb,
I'm going to let you tell it, because I want to see him sit there and squirm.
I'll tell you all about it. So just to backtrack, when I was working at Bar Boulud, and we were across the street from Lincoln Center, the director of Lincoln Center, Arthur Gelb, his son David Gelb is who did Jiro Dreams of Sushi. And I did take care of him a couple times while I was working there. So I was definitely very fanboy about it. And when I was working at Commerce, when I heard that that guy was going to come here and open a restaurant, was also super excited and had definitely a life-changing meal. My first real dialed in omakase was with Nakazawa-san. So for that reason, it does feel kind of personally specific to be here.
Right. And then you quickly shout out, you're like a New Yorker, non-Asian, and you open a sushi restaurant up, and that movie inspired you to pursue?
I think if you look at any great sushi restaurants throughout the country, the majority of them are not owned by Asians.
True, huh? I didn't know that. I mean, I trust you on that. So from the movie, you went out and you pursued.
I pursued. At that time, I think there was Yasuda and a couple other places that were actually producing somewhat of high quality sushi. But you never really saw, what we brought to Sushi Nakazawa to the table was we found a great product, a guy that could produce a great product at the highest levels. But no one was producing the front of the house at the highest levels. You would have a glass of sake.
It was a typical sushi.
Typical sushi.
A lot of blonde wood, a counter.
And it was all blonde wood.
Right.
And being a non-Asian and being Italian, I thought that we would give it a twist. And besides creating a wonderful beverage program with 1,000 different sakes on the list, we gave it to you in fine glassware. We gave it to you on Italian marble, which was a very different approach to what everyone else was doing.
Marble or marble?
You could use both.
Never mind. That's a great story because we're not talking about an ordinary restaurant or even sushi restaurant, and kudos to you. There's always people that sort of have this vision or are willing to take a chance on all of that. As you mentioned earlier, you got recognition years in, from the New York Times, bunch of stars, about as much as you can get, and almost, retained all of that. Is there pressure? I've seen this in TV shows, movies, to retain that. I mean, is that like a curse?
Absolutely.
You get that and it's like, oh crap.
No one wants to take steps backwards. But,
yeah, I mean, there's no room, right?
Right.
Is that a positive motivation or is that on edge?
Every day you gotta maintain quality.
All right. I think there's only one other sushi restaurant that's gotten 4 stars, Yoshino or something.
They received it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, so for the category, I don't.
It's been 2 in the run.
I don't get why. We just talked about the proliferation of sushi restaurants, and there's only a couple of guys with high recognition. All right, let's talk about what people are drinking and what you're serving. When did wine become a thing at sushi restaurants? When did everyone start paying attention to, I gotta have this, all of that? I gotta have Bordeaux. I have to have big stuff for big clients.
Sure.
When did you come in doing that, knowing it? Did you morph into that?
Here?
Yeah.
I walked into a program that my predecessor had put together a very respectable selection, both for sake and wine. When I started, the initial mission of mine was to grow the list pretty extensively. So we went from, 250-ish selections got up to 800, 900 in about a year.
Was that exuberance going that far? That's quadruple.
It's a small cellar and, grew it pretty aggressively, but there were things that
I
wanted to.
Are you getting tapped on the shoulder hey, take it easy,
my financials were always in a good place, but I did get tapped a little bit down the road by Chef Nakazawa because we, despite selling at that time twice as much sake compared with wine, we had 10 times more wine than sake. So I was given a little prod about getting things back in balance, at least in terms of numbers of selections.
How far into your tenure was that?
That was a year in. Yep.
Okay, because you became more knowledgeable about sushi.
Wine was my buoy in the sea.
It's a comfort.
Not knowing anything about sake.
You fall to comfort
correct.
in all of that. So what happens? You start realizing, because you get the tap on the shoulder. Was the sake game in place good? It could always use, a little growth or make it interesting.
Absolutely, that's how I felt. I also wanted to make it mine. Just, my pairings are something I do take very seriously. So there's a lot of recalibrating there and kind of changing the format of things. Definitely went a little more eclectic with the selections. Is what we were.
Let's talk about that.
Sure.
I mean, the average podcaster would do a show about pairing and sake and wine and just list 9 million things. I'll do that a little at the end because we have to do a service to our listeners. Your background, as you stated, was mostly old world, traditional, European wines.
Sure.
When we look at the list at Nakazawa on the wine side, what are we seeing?
My heart definitely has a big place in France. So we're
okay. So it's French centric,
for sure. We a very very strong champagne program, and Burgundy is a focus of ours.
Burgundy takes a nice place in the cellar.
It does, absolutely. So
is that client pull or compatibility or both?
It's really demand. I mean, I pride us on having a pretty diverse array of regions that we feature wines from and having something for everybody. But I have kind of honed in those selections just in lieu of what people do come in here request, and that is
right.
For better or worse, some higher ticket Burgundy items.
Where's the Dean part of the list? Where have you spread out? Do you have your own loves where you've brought that in to the list, that you think works well with the food?
Absolutely. I love, Spain, Germany, Austria, and Portugal are particular favorites of mine. So there's
are those compatible to what you're serving here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For me, what's really fun about our particular style of nigiri is that
tell people what nigiri is.
Sushi, pardon me. That's raw fish on top of rice.
Okay.
Seasoned vinegar rice.
Wait, sashimi is
not sushi or nigiri.
What is it?
It's just so neta is the word for topping in Japanese.
Ah.
So if you're breaking it down, it would just be neta, but it's sashimi without the rice.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have, it's like anything else. You pair a wine to, a steak, but if it has a crazy sauce on it, you have to keep in mind.
That's the wild card.
You have to keep in mind the toppings and.
For sure. And that's what I guess sets us aside from being, classic edome style, which is the traditional style of sushi, where it's just wasabi and soy sauce. We do incorporate quite a few other ingredients that are non-traditional. So with that, I really do have to find wines that are versatile and can ride the lines with a few different flavor profiles.
What it would seem to me, white wines with fish are the logical thing.
Sure.
Is that true, or the red and white thing, the split isn't that far off?
I think it depends, again, with just how many different kinds of fish and the way that we season and prepare them. It does provide a lot of background for different wines.
How is the menu set up? Is it seasonal? It's
very much so.
Is it what's available in the market that day, that week? It could change on
Correct.
the fly like that?
There's a cadence and format to the menu that has remained pretty consistent since we've been here. But those,
and then the tweaks or
those will be the seasonal swap outs. We'll have a couple of staple items that won't really change, but besides that, it's pretty dynamic. And we've started playing around with plated dishes as well, so that's been an added dimension of honing on pairings.
And you could sit at a table, or you could sit at the sushi counter, like any place.
Yes.
Most sushi restaurants, and I'm sure you do, have a sake pairing thing, right? Mm-hmm. Do you do a wine pairing thing, or you kind of call it as you go?
No, we have a sake pairing, and then a mixed wine and sake pairing, and then we of course maintain the flexibility of if someone particularly wants only wine, or wants to swap in for certain things, we'll do our best to accommodate that.
So the average service, I know there's a lot and things vary, but when you kind of average what people are doing, they're sitting down and they're ordering what? How many courses?
It's a set menu. So you walk in, we do have supplements available, but it's if you're at the counter.
Are those changes and add-ons?
Correct. So
Okay.
we've it's 21 pieces of sushi at the sushi counters, and then 20 in the dining room, which is minus a hand roll just because it doesn't travel well with the seaweed. But yeah, it'll.
So let's talk about 21 pieces. That's 21 servings, 21 courses.
Yes.
If you do the sake only, how many different sakes?
It's 8 pours.
8 pours. And are they bunched like that's like 1 in 3? Are the 3, the wine that you put against that, compatible with that, wine that you're drinking?
We'll do 1 pour for, a couple pieces. So
Right.
it'll be like, this is for your next 3 pieces of salmon,
Right.
or this for your next 4 tuna.
But you figure out this wine with these 3 pieces.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
compatibility, not clash.
Correct.
Do you sit with the chef? Do you guys talk about? I mean, does he sort of emote to you?
I do.
This would be cool, and you have suggestions.
It's something I value very much in any
Time
restaurant.
talking about that?
But just, having the reciprocity between the kitchen and the dining room to, have an open conversation about figuring things out like that.
Any surprises with that?
In terms of,
You suggest something and it kind of creates a little furor, or he asks you to do something that just doesn't make sense to you.
no, they defer to me.
So the cellar, I'm going to get into that for a second, but do you do by the glass
We sure do.
still? So somebody who doesn't want a pairing could
Yep,
knock
got you
off
on a glass.
3 glasses and kind of do the match there.
Right.
Tell me about the by the glass thing. Is that exciting to guys like you?
Is it exciting?
That you could go and buy, more wines or less wine.
Oh yeah, having more options is always better.
Like there's stuff that you buy that you could buy by the glass versus buying cases or whatever, right?
Sure.
That's pretty cool. So I want to talk about, you brought it up before, and I was going to get into it because it's pretty important to my audience and it's pretty evident out there. And that's, the growing natural wine movement, along with grower champagne. We're all looking at small wineries, family wineries. People are starting to work with less traditional varietals. And guys like Dan Petrosky are in Napa making only Italian whites.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. If you told somebody that 25 years ago, it would be 2 questions. And I think you alluded to a little before. Is anything like that happening in sake? And is there a need to pay attention to the wine part on the natural end?
Yes and yes. I mean, I think, as I was describing earlier in sake, there's, people who are going for these pretty princess, delicate, low polish Junmai Daiginjos. There are,
Which is kind of a newer modern style.
I mean, as of, since like the 70s, really, that was when like the Ginjo movement started happening, when they had the ability to make consistent products and polish them that low. But you have another group that's going back to low polishing, that's making sake like it was hundreds of years ago, that's relying more on ambient yeast fermentation than inoculation.
Which is like what natural winemakers are doing.
Totally.
Low, hands off, low intervention.
Right.
So that's definitely happening. Remember early days of natural wine, the inconsistency, the
Getting
funk,
a case
the
of 12 with 12
filter.
different bottles.
Yeah.
Right.
Is it more consistent with sake, or there's a stage of that?
I think sake is a more, I mean, if you're pasteurizing the sake, it is a more stable product than wine. So
How much sake is pasteurized? Almost all of it, or
the vast majority. I mean,
okay,
yeah, not so like most sake is pasteurized twice, once after it's fermented, and then they'll kind of like rest it and let any remaining chemical processes finish out, and then most times pasteurize it a second time so that it's a truly shelf stable, shippable product.
Is there like a no sulfur, like no pasteurized movement in sake, or you have to pasteurize?
There's a sake portfolio that is only unpasteurized sake, and definitely.
Is it like bad natural wine was, or it's interesting?
No, it's interesting. None of it was bad, but like
you carry any of it?
I have some of it.
You do.
Some of it, can be a little volatile.
Yeah,
smell like.
I think. Does, the way there's the whole sulfur movement, low sulfur, no sulfur, and a lot of it happens naturally. Some people add a little, some people just. Is there anything you need to put in sake to preserve it? Or it doesn't call for that?
The pasteurization is really what stabilizes it. It's just via how it's produced. It's a little more of a stable product in general. Like you can keep a bottle open in your fridge for weeks, if not months, and wine you have 2 or 3 days.
It's more like booze than wine,
sure,
in that sense.
Step closer, at least.
Now back to the natural wine side. Do people come in and kind of look just for that, or expect to see it?
Yeah, I mean, we get some requests for it, and we do have some limited amount of natural wines on the list. It's not
but a lot of famous winemakers, make wine naturally.
Right.
I mean, Romani Conti, right? Isn't he biodynamic?
But it's just like, are you, preserving the longevity of your wine for more than 3 months?
I said to you earlier, I didn't want to make the show about pairings. It's sort of like you sit down with a pizza guy and you ask them what are the best pairings for pizza. You could do a whole show on that. But let's talk about pairings a little. I'm more interested in wine pairings.
Okay, we do both.
Because I think I know you do, than sushi, but, let's talk about both. Is it harder to pair wine than sake with sushi, or are they equally have their...
I don't think so. And like what I was saying earlier, just because of how heavy-handed our vinegar seasoning is, and just the way we dress our fish, it really is wine-friendly food. Despite thinking of sushi as being this dainty, delicate cuisine, like we did a lunch with 100 Acre a couple years ago, and maybe not like the number one pairing I would lean towards, but like some of them got hit. And it was a room full of people whose
it could handle all that savory, the seasoning.
Right. I mean, I think that all that vinegar and salt in the rice, it can actually dry out a big, fruity, heavy-handed wine. So
is that kind of a thing of Nakazawa, where it's a saltier, more vinegar?
It's a little more like aggressive and in your face compared with some of the more delicate.
Why do you think the chef does that? It just compliments, or what's your take on that?
I mean, I think it mirrors his personality a little bit, for sure.
Okay. It's what he wants to do. It's what he feels good about.
Animated, energetic guy. And I think, coming from a background like Jiro, he definitely wanted to put his own spin on his craft and not just replicate what he had been doing. So,
right.
There's all types of different ingredients, not just Japanese, used to season.
That's fair. Talking about traditional service, it's like 3, 4, 5 courses.
Sure.
You just said 21.
Mm-hmm.
So the pairing part, you just have to break it down to more elements, right? I mean, you're doing what'd you say, 8
pours, and
8 pours, and you have to kind of study every course and do that. All right, so let me just throw a few things at you, and you add in if you think they're important.
Okay.
I don't think you'd argue with me that the most common sushi, or the most identifiable to people, is stuff like tuna, tuna toro, the belly.
Sure.
Salmon is pretty popular, mackerel. Is yellowtail tuna?
Yellowtail is not tuna.
It's not tuna. So yellowtail, eel.
Sure.
So I would guess the stuff that I mentioned, that when you do the coursing, it's probably 3 or 4 tuna types in a row, and you would put a wine against that.
Mm-hmm.
What's the pair or pairs? Give me more than one for tuna.
For tuna, so I do generally keep a red wine as the tuna pairing.
Tuna red.
So right now we're pouring 2018 Cornas from Alain and Emmanuel Versailles, which Cornas has made its appearance in the pairing program a few times over the year. I think it's great. One of my personal favorite.
That's a bingo.
For sure.
That hits
the
way it's supposed to be done.
Akami, the leanest cut of tuna, it's very, sanguine and minerally, and has this, very deep umami flavor to it, especially because of the dry aging we do.
And those wines are
So I think
savory.
You can find
peppery,
the same
a
flavor
little violet, all
qualities
that
in
good
the
stuff.
wine, and then once you get to the fattier pieces, it's just kind of like steakhouse pairing. It's just like tannins, acid, and fat.
It's pretty good.
So that, and then Colares in Portugal is one of my kind of like heartthrob.
What's it called?
Colares.
Is that the maker?
That's the appellation.
That's the appellation. Where is that?
It's actually the westernmost appellation in all of continental Europe, in the greater Lisbon region. So like southwestern Portugal.
What are the varietals?
They plant Ramisco for red wine, which is an indigenous
That's the
variety.
grape, Ramisco?
Ramisco is the
Spell
grape.
R-A-M-I-S-C-O,
Ramisco.
Ramisco.
And then Malvasia for white.
Right, that I know.
But they're, it's a very small berry with thick skin, so they're very unapproachable, harsh tannic wines in their youth. But for me, the best producer of it, and there's like 4, so not too much to choose from. So there's Ramilo, and then my favorite's a Dega Viva Gomez. There's a Colares co-op as well, and blanking on the fourth. But
do you have to bring that stuff in and hold it for a few years? So it's
no,
not
they release the wines when deemed ready, and that's usually 10 years after sitting in
like Lopez de Heredia,
centenary oak barrels. But we have wines from them going back to the 1930s on our list, and we'll frankly.
Would you say you're one of the guys that kind of not invented but introduced Portuguese wines to sushi pairings, or have you seen it around?
I mean, I won't make that claim to fame, but
no, I didn't say you invented it, but you're as much a proponent as anyone else, or is it more common than I know?
Maybe for me, they're wines that have always made sense with sushi, so
right.
And things that I like to drink. So that's
all right. Let's move to salmon.
Let's do it. So that starts off the omakase. So that'll typically be with a rosé champagne or a still rosé wine. So currently it's Gaston Chiquet Brut Rosé from DZ.
So the bubbles, a little body,
right?
Because salmon is not, this kind of innocent white. It's got a little fat and body.
Well, I mean, it comes down to the seasoning again. So like the first piece will be, chum salmon or an Arctic char with sudachi and sea salt. So it's very bright and citrusy and fresh. The next piece will be hay smoked. So there's a different element there. And then we'll have a fattier king salmon that's soy marinated and lightly blowtorched to render that fat. So
the hay smoked salmon, do you get like a little bagel with it?
When one of our chefs moved down to be the head chef of Nakazawa, DC, I would, on the way to the Amtrak in the morning from the East Village, stop by. I go to Russ and Daughters to bring him bagels because he missed them.
There you go.
But the trade-off is I had coho salmon waiting for me.
So rosé bubbles,
yes,
for salmon. Anything else?
Or, I mean, just, for pink and pink aesthetics, it's kind of like a nice way to start the meal. So it'll either be a rosé champagne or a rosé wine.
Right.
But we were doing the Clos Bon Tiburon based rosé, which
those are real rosés.
Is not, Côte de
they have a
Provence.
little body. And
that's right.
All of that. What about like a fishy fish, like mackerel?
Sure. So we do a whole flight of silverfish, and that's my personal favorite kind of sushi across the board.
We call mackerel silverfish.
It is silverfish.
Give me a couple other silverfish fishes.
So we've got aji, which is Japanese mackerel. You could say kohada, which is gizzard shad. It's in the herring family.
Right.
Or when it's in
herring,
or when it's in its baby form, shinko.
Full-bodied.
Right.
What do you pair with that?
So that I'll go into definitely some like saltier, high acid whites. So that's where Portugal does find a place. I think drier Rieslings, like I don't personally like a lot of RS to compensate for oiliness, but having just like a little touch of sweetness can kind of bring balance to
that works.
The fact that it's pickled fish on vinegar
so,
rice.
Residual sugar in a Riesling, which category of Riesling would that be? Not Cabernet, right?
I would do it like on like a ripe Cabernet or a brighter Spätlese, kind of like ride that line.
Right. 2 more. Eel is pretty popular.
Mm-hmm.
What, eel is kind of interesting.
We have a lot of fun with that because so the eel and the tamago, the sweet egg cake, which Chef Nakazawa.
The yellow cake.
Right. That's what, made Chef Nakazawa famous from the documentary.
Right. I mean, he obsessed over it.
It took 8 years, and he said he wept with happiness when he finally got like a pat on the butt for doing a good job.
Yeah.
So just because that has sugar in it, and the eel glaze itself is made from reducing the poaching liquid with sugar, that's pretty syrupy.
The poaching of the eel liquid?
Right. So take that liquid and reduce it down with
it
sugar
has
and mirin.
that
It's syrupy.
Eel, saline, and all of that stuff.
Exactly. So right now we're doing a Pinot de Charente
What is that?
So it comes from the department of Charente in southwest France, which is cognac is within that region. So it's essentially a mistel or fortified wine made by taking finished cognac and then cutting it with ripe but unfermented grape juice. So it's
ripe but unfermented.
So it has that
grape juice.
Has that spice and beautiful
I
perfume
don't
of
think
cognac.
I've ever had it. Can you spell that for me?
Yes, of course. So PINEAU DES CHARENTES. Pinot de Charente.
Got it. Interesting. And lastly, a favorite uni.
I mean, when we were doing so everyone's crazy about Japanese uni. I personally like California uni better.
It's like Santa Barbara or whatever.
We went to, we were doing the LA pop-up 2 years ago. We drove to this place, Quality Seafood in Redondo Beach, which, simple name, but speaks to the place. And we just had stuff that was like still twitching out of the water. And it was...
If you look at a box of that packed neatly in Japanese, is it visibly different?
Yeah, so Japanese sea urchin, at least what we generally work with, is short spine green sea urchin, Ezobafun uni. That tends to be kind of a smaller lobe, and they can be a little more like briny and
So what's the pair?
So that uni itself can be a divisive ingredient, and when I first started, I was like, it's like uni is my favorite thing. We need to do something cool, and we were pouring Laurent Cazot's 72 Tomates liqueur, which is a tomato liqueur from southern France.
Did you say tomato?
Tomatoes. So he's a crazy biodynamic farm, and there cultivates
that goes
72
really well
different
with
varieties.
The uni?
People either loved it or they fucking hated it. So
well, it makes
kind
sense.
of
What's the consistency of it? Is it like thinnish? Is it medium?
No, it's rich. It has sugar to it. It's rich. Creamy.
It has a rich mouthfeel?
Definitely. So it mirrored the texture of the uni for me, but
never heard of
depending on how into the counterpoint you were.
Never heard of
it. Could be offensive or delicious.
So 2 last questions. Then we got to wrap up and do our wine list. But before we do that, because at the end of the show, we're going to taste the wine. I asked you to pull out 2 wines, accessible, representative of the list, that are cool, that you like.
Sure did.
Which should we taste and talk about first?
Let's...
The wine or the sake?
Let's start with the wine. It's kind of like a
this
palate
is the
cleanser.
wine?
Sure is.
All right, so it's a white wine. Tell me what we're drinking.
So this is a 2023 Koshu from Kazumi Wines in Napa Valley, California.
Spell Kazumi.
Kazumi, which is named after Michelle Kazumi, the proprietor.
Smaller.
So they're in their 3rd year of production.
How'd you find out about them?
So I work with T. Edward Wines, who's bringing them in right now.
Great portfolio.
Michelle is a friend of Anthony Zarelli, who's now running their prestige portfolio. And so essentially her dad used to work in the wine business in Napa Valley in some regard, which I'm kind of blanking on. But basically she, in addition to planting Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet, which you see everywhere.
This? What grape?
It's the Koshu grape, which is the
Spell
national
that.
Koshu.
Koshu. Koshu.
And that's the national variety, a white variety of Japan.
And she planted it? I mean, it wasn't...
So her father, I think, was involved in a vine nursery, and they had some of the only publicly available Koshu vines in California. And then UC Davis, who I think had just the only other plot of them, had some disease outbreak, which killed all their Koshu vines. So this is, I think, the only person who's holding Koshu canes in California right now.
How much wine is she making?
She made, so 2023 is the second release of the Koshu. I think she made around 4,500 bottles.
Bottles, like 380 cases or whatever.
And change, something like that.
Can you get what you want, or you get what they give you?
I was able to get the lion's share of what came into the city for round 1, but
This is a very interesting wine. I love it. I need you to break it down for me. First, the nose.
Sure.
Does it resemble anything? And what are the characteristics of this nose?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, Koshu itself is a hybrid grape. So,
do we know?
So it is partially Vitis vinifera, but then there is some ancient Chinese variety that I haven't really quite.
So what do you get on the nose?
So for me, I mean, there are some similarities to Sauvignon Blanc here, but it is a very
not as grassy or citrusy.
Not as Perzenic by a long shot.
Salinity.
Sure, that's something I love about this wine. But definitely some like yuzu here. I get a kind of candied, almost like Haribo pineapple gummy bears, kind of like clean, but
so the mouthfeel is kind of medium. It's not a thin wine. It's not like cloying, unctuous. It feels good in the mouth.
But for being Valley Floor, I think, finding that balance in the wine is pretty impressive.
Good point. Most people wouldn't know that. On the palate, does the palate replicate what we talked about on the nose, or is new stuff introduced?
I think it feels a little riper in terms of the fruit profile on the palate.
Ripe in a good way.
In a good way.
You hear riper, it's like, oh boy.
Pleasantly ripe, but then you hit all that saltiness and acid on the back end, and I think it really brings harmony to it.
Can you find this at like cool retailers, or there's not?
A bit went to retail. I'm not sure exactly where. I do know she's...
If anywhere, it'd be New York at, blah, blah.
It's somewhere here.
Who curates, good wine.
50-ish cases came into the city.
So where does this wine fit in on where do you pair this with anything?
I do. This is currently in our pairing program.
Where does this fit in on the pairing?
So this is with the shellfish flight, which follows the salmon. So we'll go from like a rosé or a rosé champagne into a refreshing white for the next pour.
So we didn't do shellfish, but this is the type of wine that would go well with shrimp.
Right.
And we're talking shrimp.
I'd say that flight is the one that stays stable the most, just because those are some of the, the real like hits of the menu from over the years.
What's there? Shrimp, scallop?
So we start off with hotate or diver scallop from Hokkaido. That's going to have yuzu kosho, very like spicy, citrusy condiments. And then iri sake, which is a sake reduction, which gives like a kind of tart acidity. That goes into Audi Ika, which is big fin reef squid, kind of a chewier, denser, sweeter squid.
How is it served? Is it rings, tentacles?
It's the body of the squid, but
right.
As I learned, as I learned,
squid, that long oblong.
It's just like a fairly barely opaque.
Okay.
Squid,
but it's a little thicker or more full bodied. You said
butchered accordingly, but they'll also usually score that just so it kind of breaks down easier in your mouth. That's with shiso and sour plum, which is a very classic combination with squid in Japan. That'll swap into either kuruma ebi or tiger prawn, or then botan ebi or spot prawn. And then we do kani oshizushi, which is an older style of sushi that came from Kyoto, where we're basically pressing it and then serving it in a square block as opposed to like the football shape usually see with rice. And that'll be either snow crab or Dungeness crab with the crab guts on top and then blowtorched.
Is the shrimp raw, or is it?
If it's the spot prawn, it's raw, and that'll be with finger lime caviar. If it's the tiger prawn, that's going to be lightly poached with mustard.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to post these wines on our social media.
Right.
We're going to do the wine list, and I'm going to ask you a question. It's 5 questions, same 5 questions to everybody. One of the questions is your favorite wine and food pairing. We'll get to that in a second. I'm just curious, in your mind, is like they're the ultimate sushi pairing? Is it sake and something? Champagne. Works every time.
Every time. But I think you can
Would that work with uni?
Absolutely.
Would that work with silverfish?
I could see it working too.
Would that work with fatty tuna?
Across the board.
Doesn't champagne go with everything?
It sure does.
It does, right?
So kind of a
pizza, fried chicken,
But that's why I think it's, as much as that's just easily delicious, I think it's fun to dial in a little bit more with sake.
I hear that. I'm a huge champagne guy. How big is the champagne? How much champagne on the list?
About 175 selections.
Okay. And if I don't want to spend a ton, can I get into a fair price range on the lower end?
And we also have
you've curated.
We have champagne, and then we also have a section of sparkling wine, which also features places from around France, but then other, off-kilter regions and producers.
All right. So when I said the ultimate pairing, you said champagne. Did you mention a sushi or?
You're talking about
any sushi and champagne.
Are you just talking about in general food pairing, or just with sushi specifically?
What's the ultimate sushi pairing?
Yeah, I mean champagne.
Okay. And anything. All right. So we're done with that. We're going to do the wine list. 5 questions, like I mentioned to you. I've asked almost 300 people the same 5 questions. We post them. It's fun for a guy like you who really has his head deep into this stuff to see what you're drinking.
Sure.
It's more about you. So the first question is, what is Dean drinking now? What's in the fridge at home? What are you trying for work? What are you curious about outside of work? Give me a few things.
I mean, I definitely stay on brand these days, and quite a bit of sake in the rotation. But
is that 2 things good for biz? But you like this stuff enough, or?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I'm living and breathing it to an extent these days, but I do generally.
What sake you drinking? Style and which one?
Depends on the mood.
Okay.
I really love so Thai food is one of my favorite cuisines.
Sake goes well.
It's
perfect.
I think you should
Not
drink with Thai food.
Gewürztraminer.
Well, I have a sake which I kind of compare to Gewürz, but in like a non-soapy, offensively aromatic way that I think fits really great with that cuisine. But,
all right. So sake, give me something else.
Portuguese whites, I'm really big into.
Which?
Anything from basically the Iberian coast.
Okay. Any particular makers, or there's a bunch that are good?
I like Luis Pato and Bairada, I think, doing incredible things.
All good.
Quinta de Perdigão and the Dow. As I mentioned, Colares, they're doing some really killer, salty old vine Malvasia.
All right.
To name a few.
And then you're always drinking when people are coming in for you to taste stuff, and you'll go to portfolio tastings or other stuff. All right. Now let's get to this. What is your favorite wine and food pairing? Not what you think is good. What do you like? You don't eat it every night, every week, every month, but you eat it a bunch of times and you understand and recognize this wine or sake with this food is just ooh-ah.
Like I kind of said, like Thai and sake is a big thing for me these days, but...
So can we just take a break for a second from the list? We'll get back to it.
Sure.
How many different categories of sake are there? Is that the right question?
There are classifications, which
that's what I meant.
Kind of, don't necessarily tell you exactly what the bottle's going to be like. So I'd say there are guidelines to kind of work within, and I'd say compared with wine, you need to be a more curious consumer, and at least in terms of what information is readily available. I as a buyer and someone who's very focused on this, I still find conflicting things online all the time, and if I pose a question to the brewery itself, it has to go through a chain of 4 to 6 people before it gets to the president. So it's like, it takes a little more proactivity, I would say.
But isn't there like Junmai, is that how it's classified? Or
it really will tell you very little about what the final product tastes like.
So not an easy question to answer.
Not quite.
Especially when you're so deep into it like you. It's
like I said, starting with Burgundy, where as complicated and intense as it is to really wrap your head around that region, you can at least depend on this place gives its own characteristic.
All right, let's get back to this. Third question. Your favorite wine restaurant and or bar through your travels. And here's the deal on this. I'm not asking you to give me your absolute favorites or rank them. I'm asking you to just throw out some places that you appreciate the wine list, the people, the vibe, their knowledge and all of that. I don't want friends coming up to you and saying, hey, I listened to that silly podcast. How come you didn't mention my place? Screw them. But give me some places that do it.
A few favorites of mine, Le Compagnie des Vins Naturels, both their locations.
I think they do it well there.
Kind of an extension of my living room, you could say.
And they have that machine thing with the glass pours.
I tried pitching that here. It didn't go too far.
No, okay.
The reverse osmosis dishwasher.
Okay.
Parcel Wine Bar is great down in Chinatown.
Grant does a good job.
My good friends Q and Dina just opened Demo over here on Carmine Street. Demo, named after Father Demo Square.
Yeah, hearing good things about that. Are they former Contra people?
Q used to work for Contra and was running Wild Air for a number of years, and then Dina was most recently at Chambers.
They have food there too, right?
Sure do.
So you can get some good food, and the wine list
is
great.
Killer. It's so good.
Okay, give me. Those are all great, and that's what I'm looking for. Give me a restaurant where the wine list, it doesn't have to be La Bernardine. Give me some place that's really good, impressive, or caught your eye.
Well, I'd say the place I've been frequenting the most over the last year, and it's as a new Williamsburg transplant, is Kru, Kru.
Yes.
Which is a Thai restaurant.
So shameless plug. They're going to be on the show in 2 weeks.
Incredible. Well,
and our friend James O'Brien is helping them with the wine.
Well, I was just about to mention.
So the story is a good story.
So you already know then.
The podcast is based out of Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. As much as we have literally a global audience, we're still in New York and we're still in Brooklyn. So I always feel obliged to go back. I always, the new wine director at Roberta's, because we do the show there, we'll have him on. But Brooklyn places, retailers and all of that. So I'm very curious about Crew because it's a good story.
Right.
So Crew, the food, the wine,
everything about it. Their staff,
Yep.
from top to bottom, are incredibly sweet and on point, and the food's delicious and unique.
I'm anxious to talk to them.
And James is doing the wine list, so it's,
I like his taste. All right, fourth question. Question is favorite all-time wine. It was originally structured, what is the most expensive rare wine you ever tasted? You're in the business, you probably, who cares?
boring.
What's boring? What's the wine that had the most effect on you? Opened your eyes, took you to another level, memorable, changed the way you thought about it. Could be one, two, whatever. You have something
for anyone who I've ever chatted about my career with, they probably already know the answer to this, but it was
I'm guessing Rhone or no?
yes, sir. 1999 August Clap out of Magnum by the Glass at Barbalud.
Was 99 a good Rhone vintage in the
Excellent
north?
Rhone vintage.
One of the better ones?
Yes, in the 90s for sure.
So you got a great vintage, a great producer, big bottle, which ages better.
Yeah, all the right things you want in line.
What year was that?
That was my first month at bar, so that was 2010.
So it had 10 years of bottle age. Probably could have gone
Longer.
A lot longer.
Well, I've had that wine
Since.
on every list I've ever worked with since then, so I've been able to.
So a
Retaste it a couple
1999
times.
Clap. Does he make different bottlings or?
There's the Vin des Amis, which is basically the declassified Cornas, and then they do make white wine in San Pere, which I
Right.
don't see too much
But
floating
this
around.
is the.
That's the
Yeah.
flagship of very few coupes.
All right. Final question is self-serving. This is to help my kids buy reasonable wine. Recommend to me best wine around 15, 20, 22 bucks retail. Recommend a red, recommend a white. You can go category. I mean, I could tell you right now, a good part of this answer is Portuguese wines, but I'll leave you to it. But
That's where I was leaning.
Muscadet, if you get the right maker, if you like that. But give me best value in that price range. Go red first. That's the harder one.
It is, because I don't buy a lot of red wine anymore, but at least a drink. I don't know. I think Baden in Germany can present some really excellent values for Pinot Noir. I'm not sure.
So bottom Pinot, you think you can pick up a bottle in the States for 22, 25 bucks?
Yeah, maybe not anymore.
I mean, that's a good direction. I love that.
Okay, then how about this? There's a producer called Botanica in Hemelanarda, South Africa, which has I've tasted a couple of pretty like
Lower end of the price scale, great quality.
20-ish bucks. Drink akin to
Botanica?
Botanica.
Botanica, Botanica.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the grape?
It's Pinot Noir.
It is Pinot Noir.
Planted by an
Africa's
American
high.
woman in South Africa.
All right, so that's good red. White, you probably could shoot your load here. Give me some whites.
I mean, I was going to lean towards Portugal, surprisingly, but I think that wine I mentioned, the Quinta de Perdigão and Cruzado.
So Quinta, Quinta, da or da?
D-O.
Do.
Perdigao. Perdigão.
Perdigão. Okay. What's the grape?
Grape is Cruzado, so it's a native Dow variety, which
What's the characteristic of that grape in that?
I mean, it was something that used to be blended into Vino Verde, so it didn't really get a lot of singular love. But
what does it do to the Vino Verde? Body, aromatics?
Freshness and acid, from what I've gathered. But
more acidic than Vino Verde?
I mean, it's an acidic variety for sure.
Okay.
But it has, again, like, I just love coastal salty wines, and it definitely checks that box. But there is this interesting kind of like nuttiness to the varietal character, which I think gives an interesting kind of savory.
Not like an oxidative nutty,
no,
just
like,
a nutty.
Like fresh hazelnut, fresh almond
Nice.
kind of thing.
That's a good character.
But still very like citrusy and expressive.
All right, good job on those. As I mentioned, we post your answers. So if you didn't hear, even if I made Dean spell stuff, I will eventually post it in the coming week. All right. Our last part before I let you go is the weekly wine sip. Every week we taste a different wine on air. We have a ton of winemakers on, so why wouldn't we taste their wines? Your whole existence is to search out, pick the best wines. So I asked you. We tasted the white wine. Now we're going to try a sake.
Sake.
All right. So tell me Tell me as much as you can about this.
I'll tell you all about it. So this is from a brand produced in Mie Prefecture, which is in the southeastern part of the main island.
Spell Mie.
M-I-E.
M-I-E. I don't think I've ever heard of it.
Yeah.
Mie okay. Bigger, smaller, common, popular? Or
smaller producer.
The prefecture, I mean. Producer-wise and all that? Medium.
I mean, there's a good handful of breweries
Okay.
and definitely some notable prominent ones, but G-Con is just starting to release more and more of their products into the States, which is exciting.
That's the producer, G-Con?
G-Con.
Spell.
J-I-K-O-N.
Okay.
And so this particular brewery and brand of sake, they essentially source different rice varieties from around the country and then ferment it themselves. This one is my favorite out of their lineup, which is made from a rice variety called Senbon Nishiki. Let me spell it.
What is... Spell Senbon.
S-E-N-B-O-N.
Okay. What is Nishiki?
Nishiki translates loosely to like brocade. And the reason for that is it's the
What
way
does that mean?
It's the way like the rice fields wave in the wind.
Oh, okay. To that point,
So you're
are
that word
there
with a
like
lot of
a
rice varieties.
state sake makers where they own the rice fields, or that's
Definitely.
people contract different stuff? People have their own. Okay.
The vast majority is contract farming.
It is.
But there are a few, you could say, domain-focused sake breweries that have come into prominence. One that we work with particularly strongly is Kamoshibito Kuheiji, which is in Aichi, just to the north of this region of Japan. And that producer has 3 different rice paddies, all of which have different soil types, but they're growing all their own rice the same way. So it was eye-opening to taste things like that side by side.
That's a cool
and
presentation.
a unique take on it. But these guys, however, are just...
All right, so tell me about this.
So Senbon Nishiki is a cross between Yamada Nishiki and then another lesser-known variety called Nakate Shinsenbon, which is a native Hiroshima variety.
I'm glazed over, but keep going.
Oh, you can run it back. But I think the aromatics on it are really beautiful. It's super floral. There's
All
this...
right, so is this... I keep going back to this, but is this categorized as...
This is a Junmai Ginjo, so they've polished the
Junmai
rice to
Ginjo.
55% here.
Okay. All right, so the color, is this a typical sake color? This is super pale with a tinge of yellow, right?
Just a slight tint.
Okay. Let's go nose here.
All right.
Do sakes vary on the nose, or when you...
Very much.
But you smell it, you know right away, that's sake. Or not always. Yeah.
I don't know. I've never blinded myself with wine and sake.
I think,
Like served at
yes.
room temperature.
So
but-
what are we getting on the nose here?
So like I said, very floral, a lot of candied red fruits for me. There's this very like ripe baby strawberry and raspberry aromatic, but
Yes, very candied, and those fruits.
smells like blue cotton candy at a county fair almost. It's
crazy.
right?
Do a lot of sakes smell like this? Is this a typical profile?
So this
'Cause this is pretty intense.
There's 2 main chemical compounds in sake that determine flavor, or sorry, the aromatic profile. One is isoamyl acetate, which gives you a lot of like kiwi and apple and these kind of more citrusy green flavors. And then isoamyl acetate, or sorry, ethyl caprate is the other, which gives you more of these like banana, tropical, floral.
It's got both?
Qualities. Yeah. There's a lot to it going on fruit wise. It's very pretty and nuanced.
Is this a typical mouthfeel? Is this rich? Is this thinner? Is this medium? I mean, where does this fall? I don't drink enough sake to tell you. I drink enough wine to say medium plus, medium negative, thin.
I think of textures in beverage in terms of shapes. So like Junmai Daiginjo or richer sake or wine for that matter, I kind of think of having a roundness and in terms of texture. Ginjo, I feel it drinks a little leaner, a little more focused. So I think
this is more a body.
I think there's weight and concentration here, but it still has like a freshness and a clean finish.
The palate is off the charts. I
Tasty,
mean,
right?
the nose descriptors were pretty cool. I think they're there and more. Talk to me about what you get on the palate here.
I think it translates very well, but whereas everything I described, you might picture it being a beverage that's kind of like cloying and heavy. The way G-Con makes their sake across the board, which it's cool to see just with the different, through the lens of different rice varieties, the consistent house style. I think they just display a lot of finesse and detail, and there's a lot of again, lift and brightness and freshness to the sake.
It's all of that. And I'm curious, Americans love wine that have residual sugar, like the best-selling, like The Prisoner is not a huge selling wine.
We also
by
love Coca-Cola.
Coincidence. It's got a lot of residual sugar, and it's not just dry cab or whatever. Everything you described about this sake is there, but this is like a crowd pleaser. It's sweet enough, but not cloying.
Mm-hmm.
It's aromatic. It's floral. The taste is crazy.
It's harmonious.
Yeah, I mean, it all works without any one thing. So it's tremendous in that, not too dry. Something, I like dry stuff. I can go beyond that. What's the pairing for this? Does this work into your pairings? Or,
no, we get
we
don't get too much of this, so this will not be in the pairing program.
So this is a treat for me. Thanks.
Make it
what
worth the trip
would
up
you
here.
pair with this?
I could see this fitting in with our shellfish flight for sure. Again, having all those more tart citrus elements with this, you'll find some
Citrus
balance.
would work well with this.
That little touch of sweetness will go away. You'll still have the fruit, and it'll just feel like a drier sake and how it drinks. Place
how
it there.
much of this do you get? Is this limited, or you're okay?
I get offered a case, and then I have to beg for a little bit more.
Okay.
I usually get it, but it's
So
pretty
a
allocated.
sake like this, how many people will come in on the list and know what's going on with this? How many are recommended? And because you only get so much, how do you recommend? A good client?
There's one memorable night where I was like flipping through the list talking about options, and the guy just cut me off. He's like, "Oh shit, you have G-Con," and I was like, "Oh, well, I sure do." So I have been seeing, having been here 7 years, really in the last couple, there's a lot more actual brand recognition of certain breweries by our customers.
Return people kind of are inquisitive,
That too,
and they talk to you, and but it's not like that guy who came in and drank all your Rhone wine or something. Remember?
I do remember
that guy every week in a row.
We love that guy.
Cleans, yeah. Who wouldn't? All right, so tell me again the name of this.
So this is Jikon Senbon Nishiki,
Okay.
Junmai Ginjo from Mie Prefecture.
All right. I will post that. Is there any way to get this retail, or it's because you're Nakazawa and you're Dean, you get more of it and it doesn't get out there?
I think a little bit of it goes to retail.
Okay.
I'd imagine like after.
So that's, I don't mean to say problem, but that's my listeners' problem. Let them figure it out. It may be out there.
I'd say the frustrating thing about this is I traveled to Japan, and every cool sake bar I went to was pouring this stuff by the glass out of magnums, but we get like
crazy.
nothing here. So it's out there. They make it, but
that's crazy.
He's got to work for it.
I think before I leave, I'm going to make you pour me a little more.
All
right, Dean, I got to do a wrap up, and then I want to get some info from you. So just hang in there through this.
Sure.
If you have a question, suggestion, wine happening, or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Subscribe to the Grape Nation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your pods. If you like the podcast, leave a positive review. Follow us on Instagram at @SBenRuby, on Twitter X @BenRuby, 2 different handles, but you can reach us on both with the hashtag The Grape Nation. We're on Facebook at The Grape Nation. As I mentioned, we'll post Dean's wine list, his answers, some good recos there, and our weekly wine sip, which was 2 things, a sake and a wine. 2 pretty interesting choices. Dean, kudos to you. Like I said, I'll post them on our social media sites. Dean, tell me 2 things. If people want more info on Nakazawa, reservations, website, where do they go? If they want to follow them on social media, where do they go? And where do they follow you on social media? I know where they follow you, but I want you to tell people this could be one of the great Instagram handles. Okay. So people want to know more about Nakazawa. What's the best thing?
Our website has all of our information.
Is it a Resi, open table?
We're on Resi. That's
okay.
for so our sushi counters, which are kind of more the sought after seats. Those book solely through Resi. The dining room we can take over email, but prefer Resi.
And is it at Sushi Nakazawa?
At Sushi Nakazawa and at Sushi Nakazawa DC. And then
just add the DC.
LA eventually.
And Dean, tell everyone your Instagram.
You can follow me at Grand Cru Jew.
There you go. Grand Cru Jew. All right. And it's not the Japanese Jew, J-U. It's the Jew, J-E-W. Do you post a lot?
Every once in a while.
Sure. Okay. All right. One last thing before we leave, I want to tell you about Come Over October. It's created by Wine Bible author Karen McNeil. Come Over October is a campaign that celebrates wine's unique ability to bring friends and family together. Today, more than ever, wine's positive role in society is both relevant and important. Visit comeoveroctober.com to learn how you can get involved in the campaign. I want to thank our guest, Dean Fuerth.
Thank you.
I want to thank our engineer, Armin, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben-Ruby, and you have been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.